What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I'm going to be sharing the best settings that I've found with XDefiant for controller, because honestly, that's one of the most difficult parts of this game, is really getting those controller settings nailed down, and I finally got them to a point where I'm actually quite comfortable with them, and I wanted to share those with you guys today. Now, of course, for the obvious disclaimer at the beginning here, when it comes to settings, especially when it comes to like sensitivity options, for instance, so much of this is going to come down to personal preference, and of course, you're going to have to make adjustments that suit you. So I'm not necessarily saying just copy and paste everything I've got and everything's going to feel amazing for you, because your preference may differ from mine, but I'm hoping this will at least give you some insight into what many of the settings do, and at least give you a good starting point to work off of. And without further ado, let's dive right into this, and we're going to start it off with the gameplay and UI settings. For me, I really like a field of view of 105. Now, again, this is all going to come down to preference. Some people want to max that all the way out to 120. Others want to have it lower so you can like zoom in a little bit further and see targets at longer ranges better. For me, for this game, I just found 105 to be a nice, consistent balance. And speaking of consistent, that's the setting I use for the ADS field of view. Now, just to show you guys what this does, if you go independent, when you aim down sight, you're going to be zooming in quite far here. Whereas when you switch this over to consistent, when you aim down sight in the same situation, this will scale based on your current FOV. So with me being at a 105 FOV, I'm going to be zoomed out much more while aiming down sight now. Then for ADS behavior, that's obviously hold. For ADS sensitivity transition, this one's a bit strange. Call of Duty uses an instant ADS transition for sensitivity, but in this game, for some reason, I just feel like blend is working better for me, and that's why I'm sticking with blend, at least for now. This is working really well for me, and if you guys haven't tried it yet, maybe give that a shot, and it might help you a little bit. Then I just leave melee during ADS off. Aiming interrupts the reload, I meant to have that off. This I like keeping off as well. For crouch behavior, I prefer that being on a toggle. Sprint behavior, tap. I personally turn auto sprint off. This is a setting I know many people, they really like having auto sprint on, and that's just a preference thing, so you guys select that based on what you want. I personally don't mind tapping the button to sprint. One setting I definitely recommend turning on is sprint interrupting reload, so you have that method of reload canceling. For slide behavior, I have tap, auto reload weapon is on, auto switch weapon is on. Auto ledge grab, I keep that off. I don't like my character doing things that I don't tell them to do, like mantling over something, especially if it's something that can interrupt what I'm doing as far as aiming and shooting. So I keep that one off. And then scrolling all the way down here, we have our challenge notifications that'll just pop up as you progress challenges. You can have it set to all, so every time you progress a challenge, it'll pop up letting you know that you're progressing it. Or you could just set it to completion only, so it only pops up once the challenge is completed. Or honestly, you could turn that off. This one's obviously just completely preference-based. For damage numbers, this is what it looks like in-game. When you're shooting somebody with damage numbers on, you will see the amount of damage that each bullet is dealing as it hits. Same thing with the enemy health bars. I personally like keeping that on. That actually helps a little bit with player visibility in some situations as well, so definitely I like keeping that one on. Minimap rotation, this one seems to be working backwards unless I'm reading things wrong here. You would think that you want minimap rotation on so it rotates with you, but turning it off is what keeps your minimap rotating with you, so I leave that off. Another thing is I would definitely recommend turning your ping display on so you can see which server you're connecting to and what your ping is. So if you happen to get in a server that's way out of your region, you can just leave the game before realizing that your ping is absolutely horrible. And then finally, your team composition overlay. Personally, I like keeping this off, but just to show you guys what this looks like, this is what it looks like in-game when you have it turned on. You can see the team composition, like which factions each of your players are using on your team, as well as the enemy team. And that can definitely be very valuable information if you really want to know all the details and what you should set yourself up with as far as supporting your teammates or countering the enemies. In my opinion, though, this does take up a little too much of the screen, so I just leave that off and I don't worry too much about that. And with that out of the way, let's get into the really important stuff. This is our controller settings. And when it comes to my button layout, I use the brawler layout. This is equal to the tactical layout in Call of Duty, so this allows me to crouch by clicking R3 rather than taking my thumb off of the aiming stick to crouch. Then I leave my stick layout to default. Aim assist is standard. I also didn't adjust the aim assist strength and follow at all. I know some people like dropping this down a little bit to like -3 or something. I just found leaving it at 0 felt normal to me, so I just left it there. For aim response curve, this is going to be an area that is highly preference-based. There is no right answer when it comes to your aim response curve. I know many people like standard, myself included. Some people like linear, and then other people really like reverse S-curve. And just in case you guys are wondering, reverse S-curve is equal to the dynamic response curve in Call of Duty. So if you're somebody that plays on dynamic in COD, you'll probably want to go with reverse S-curve in this game. For me, I play standard in COD, and I play standard on XDefiant. Then when it comes to sensitivity, I'm going to start this off by saying in Call of Duty, I tend to play on an 8 and 8 sensitivity with a 0.7 or 0.75 ADS multiplier. And in XDefiant, what I landed on is my horizontal sensitivity at 50 and my vertical sensitivity at 35. And that might seem a little strange. Normally, I keep these values consistent, but it turns out in this game, I found a roughly 2-to-3 ratio to feel best when it comes to this. I know I'm not exactly on a 2-to-3 ratio, but just somewhere within that general range seems to feel best and most like Call of Duty to me. And it also seems to help me compensate for that recoil a lot more precisely when I have this offset a little bit. So this is what felt good to me. Again, this is coming from somebody that plays on an 8 and 8 sensitivity for Call of Duty. So if you play on a much lower sensitivity, maybe you drop these values but maintain that ratio. Or vice versa, if you play on a higher sensitivity than I do, then increase these numbers while keeping that ratio at least roughly the same. Then when it comes to my aim sensitivity look factor, I had to drop this all the way down to 0.55. Like I said, in Call of Duty, I play on about 0.7 or 0.75 for this. In this game, to maintain that precision while aiming down sight with the sensitivity values, I found 0.55 to work best for me. However, when I'm using a scope, that's way too slow to drop it all the way down to 0.55. If somebody's running perpendicular, I can't track them properly with that, so I leave this one at 0.75, and that generally allows me to track enemy players as they're running. Then when it comes to Deadzones, this is mainly going to come down to your controller rather than your personal preferences. You basically want to set these values as low as reasonably possible without getting a lot of stick drift. So what I mean by that is if you drop these all the way down, let's go right down to 0, and I just go into game right now, I'm not touching anything on my controller right now, you'll see my character is moving a little bit to the right. So that means my sensitivity or my dead zone is set way too low in that situation. And for me and my controller, I have found about 4 and 4 seems to work well, where I don't typically get any drift when I put my controller down. Next up, let's get into a setting that's often misunderstood. This is our acceleration speed multiplier. Now this, I thought, would just mean like as you're accelerating at any point throughout your stick deflection, this would increase the amount of acceleration that you're experiencing. But I talked to Aches about this a little bit, and it turns out this only applies when your stick is fully deflected all the way over to the left or to the right. Then this acceleration multiplier kicks in suddenly. And for me, I kind of like being able to spin quickly. So I leave this at 1.75, but your preferences will vary on this. Maybe you don't want that really extreme spin. But in that case, if I don't want an extreme spin, now I just know you don't fully deflect your stick all the way to the side. You just go most of the way. You can just deflect that stick like 90% of the way, and you will never experience this acceleration multiplier. After that, I don't play inverted at all. And then controller vibration, I always leave that off. I just find it to be an unnecessary distraction. I've got enough visual cues to know when I'm being shot or when I'm shooting my gun, so I just leave that off. And that's it for my controller settings, but let's just quickly go over the audio settings I like using. I do like dropping my dialogue volume down to 70, just so it doesn't get in the way of me hearing footsteps or any in-game cues that would be really necessary. Also with UI volume, I turn that down to 75, and I turn music volume off. This is primarily because I'm a YouTuber and I spend a lot of time just sitting in menus when I'm testing stuff, and I don't like constantly hearing that menu. Then with voice chat, I just leave that off permanently. I just don't like using voice chat in games. And then with video, this is something you're gonna have to adjust based on your monitor or TV that you play on. These are the settings that I'm using that work for my monitor settings that I've currently got. And obviously, if you have the ability, if you're playing on PS5 like I am, you wanna turn 120 Hertz on if your monitor will support that. After that, in language and accessibility, one thing I want to point out is by default, for some reason, my dialogue was set to Spanish. So if you're noticing that your characters are speaking Spanish and you'd like them to speak English, make sure you check this setting. I managed to change this back over to English so I can hear what's going on. And then the only other setting I really changed here is my flashbang effect. You can turn this to bright or dark. So when you get flashbanged, instead of your screen going white, which can be kind of blinding to you, you can turn that to dark so your screen just turns black. And there we go. That is going to wrap it up for the settings that I have nailed down for XDefiant. They're feeling really good for me so far. And I honestly don't anticipate that I'll be making any major adjustments to this as time goes on from here on out. I'm quite happy with this, and it's here to stay. But now I just wanted to talk briefly about how I got into the firing range, because at least at the time of recording this video, really early on in the game's life cycle, the practice zone is locked. People can't get in that unless you're on PS5. There is a method to get in here, and I wanted to show how to do that. So what you do with this is boot up the game, and then once your game's booted up, you want to open up your home screen in PlayStation, find your XDefiant tab, and then just scroll down from there, and you can see the practice zone, and then just press square on that, and it will just force launch the practice zone from there. So you can actually get in, at least on PS5. I'm unaware of any method of doing this on the other platforms, though, unfortunately. At the moment, I think there's no way to get in on the other platforms. It's only working on PS5. I'm sure this is something where hopefully soon they will just launch this so the practice zone will be working normally for everybody, but there's at least a workaround for you on PS5. And with that, that is going to wrap it up for today's video, and this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the controller settings and options in XDefiant so far? And if you're on controller especially, what sensitivity values did you land on? And if you are going to leave that, if you could for reference, just leave what you use in Call of Duty as well. So then maybe if people scroll down there and see somebody that uses the same sensitivity as them in Call of Duty, they can just try copying your settings and see if that works for them in XDefiant. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.